Hello there. Well, it's Thursday lunchtime. Postman's just been. England and Denmark a few hours away from kick-off, but I have absolutely no idea what this is. And I won't. I'm going to have to film it. I'm going to have to film it. I have absolutely no idea what it is. So I'm just going to... No, I can't get into it yet. It looks vinyl shaped. But genuinely, I've no idea. Talk amongst yourselves, you know. Wow. Oh, we're in here now. But what is it? Oh, I have no idea. It is A Mirror of Dreams. The Progressive Rock Revival, 1981 to 1983. So, I'm just going to open it up so we can see what it is. And here we go. Look at this. So, this is by Andrew Wilde, A Mirror of Dreams, The Progressive Rock Revival, 1981 to 1983. And it says at the back, with the advent of punk rock and new wave, the music of Pink Floyd, Yes, Genesis, the other major name progressive rock bands became unfashionable. However, in the late 70s and early 80s, 6 new progressive rock groups would be formed by young musicians. So it goes into Marillion, 12th Night, Pendragon, and this is good. Look at this. So I'm just going to show you inside, and I'm going to have a look and I'll report back. But there's some of the artwork there of what to expect. And there's a chapter there about the music press in the 80s. This looks really detailed.
So, right now on Talking Music, I have been reading A Mirror of Dreams, the Progressive Rock Revival. Hey, snap, I like that. I like that. I'm joined by the author, Andrew Wilde. Hiya, Andrew. I love the cars
Hi,
in the
Chris. Hi,
background.
Chris. Yeah, how you doing? Call me Andy.
I will do, Dee. Thank you, Andy.
You're
Now,
welcome.
so your book, I guess in a summary, follows 6 groups during the story, but they all kind of interlink with each other, don't they? But tell us who we can expect, I guess, first of all.
Yeah, absolutely right. The basis of the book is the Marquee Club in the early 80s. So the Marquee Club is a famous small venue on Wardour Street in Soho. And at that time, the Marquee was playing host to music pretty much 7 nights a week. And for about 2 or 3 years during that period, you would be able to go down and see one of these 6 bands who kind of formed, if you like, the second wave of progressive rock. So the kind of classic era of progressive rock from the end of the 60s through the 70s had started to wind down, I guess. And the mainstream music industry was not remotely interested in the likes of Yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis in that period. Even though the success was still there was no coverage whatsoever. And kind of into that vacuum was pulled, as you say, a group of 6 bands. That's Marillion, IQ, Pendragon, Palace, Solstice, and 12th Night, who you could kind of group together as being, if you like, the second wave of those progressive sounds, building very much on what had gone before. And he kind of added to that an 80s feel to it, but also with, to a degree, the kind of DIY element that punk had brought around. So with fanzines and cassette tapes, the ability to record your demos, at home was quite a newish thing as the 80s came along. So yes, we tell the story of all of those 6 bands playing at the Marquee and all around the country, having some success. Marillion were given a record contract in this period. Palace at the very end were signed to the same record label. And we kind of take it up to and slightly beyond the 1983 Reading Festival, where 5 of those 6 bands performed over the weekend, and the other band, that was IQ, were there in the audience supporting. So that's kind of the thrust of the book, is what happened up to and including the end of 1983. And next year, Volume 2 will cover that right up to the end of the 80s. So what happened next, it will be in Volume 2 next year. It's been a good project.
I was going to say I haven't. Do you know? I've never really delved into the world of prog rock, and if you were to say 1981 to 83 to me, my experience would be Top of the Pops and the very safe sounds that
Yeah,
you got on
yeah.
there, and it's just It's such a fascinating read, and it's made me want to listen to the music that's mentioned. I mean, I'd heard of Marillion. I'd only heard of, I think, Garden Party and Kaylee. So obviously, there's a lot still to pick up from it.
Absolutely right, and it is a niche genre, if you like. But I think what the book should bring out is it was extremely popular with a small, very devout set of fans who would go along to the marquee every week, twice a week, same people often, seeing these bands. And because of the way that the industry worked then, they could talk to the band members. They could find fanzines by guys who wrote them, who were their age, and they were looking after the same thing. It was very much, I hesitate to use the word a scene because it sounds a bit hippie, but I think it probably was. And I think it had its apogee, its absolute apex in 1983 and 1984. And then later on, these were young kids as well, by the way. They weren't older fans who had come to find this new music. They were younger fans who were aged 16, 17, 18, and 19 years old. And my theory is that by the end of 84, one or two of the bands had started to flounder a little bit. A lot of the fans would have gone away to university and had other things in their lives from that point, and the scene kind of started to fade away. However, and I think it's really important to follow this through, of the 6 bands we cover in detail in these 2 books, 5 of them still playing, still touring, still recording today, and have been ever since.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. You've touched on it already, but I love the chapter about the marquee, because not only do you touch on the spell kind of in the 80s, but obviously you bring us up to date with what happened to the marquee, where it moved to, the attempts to bring it back, and the history before the 80s, if you like. Some of the big names that played there. It's a really in-depth chapter, but that goes throughout.
Absolutely. I was helped out with that a little bit. There was a really good book written 2-3 years ago by the son of the owner or the manager of the marquee. We worked together. Got a little bit of research information from them, but absolutely everybody played at the marquee. And when bands wanted to do a secret gig, that's where they'd go. So Genesis played there, I think, under the pseudonym The Garden Wall. I think Prince played a couple of tiny gigs there, and this is a very small venue. But what really I found fascinating in terms of synchronicity is that the marquee in Wardour Street, in effect, because it had been 7 nights a week, loud music every night for 30 years at that point, it basically shook the building to pieces, and they had to knock most of it down. The front door is still there, but very little else is still there. And actually, the last gig at the Wardour Street marquee, I think, was either the week before or the week after that Fish left Marillion. So these 2 kind of important signposts that this kind of second wave scene was starting to fizzle out were within kind of the same week. And we originally planned actually to finish volume 2 when the marquee closed, but enough stuff happened in 1989 as well to include that in volume 2 as well.
I was going to say, it's so detailed, the book as well. I mean, you've got a definitive list of, as best, obviously, to your ability, of the gigs that were at the marquee as well. I was going to say that must have took some doing.
Yeah, it took some time. I think we counted it up in that between 81 and 88, these 6 bands played there 180 times between them.
Oh, my word.
Staggering figure. But those came from newsletters, from conversations with fans who were there, with some information from the guy who researched that marquee book himself, ticket stubs that we found where it got dates and support acts on it. Everything went into a great big spreadsheet. In fact, we've got a spreadsheet of every gig those bands played in that period, not just at the marquee. And that was the basis for the research phase of the book that I wrote. So I was commissioned February 23. So we're talking in July 24, so not quite 18 months ago. I was commissioned at that time, and I think I spent maybe 10 or 12 weeks. I'm a spare time author, so this was all in my spare time. spent 10 or 12 weeks just doing the background research, getting the timelines in place, understanding the gigs, the important events, the albums or the demo tapes or the Friday Rock Show sessions or whatever it was, and getting them all in order. And that, to me, was the foundation of the whole book. Both books were written simultaneously together. And then I started to build a wish list of who I'd like to speak to, because desk research is all very well, but it doesn't really have much of a human story in it. So I wanted to get the voices of the people who were there. And to do that, you have to interview people. And that's where so Greg Sporton, who was my editor, and I built a wish list of who we'd like to talk to. Okay. And basically it was everybody in all 6 bands was our wish list, plus some other individuals, plus everybody who was in the other bands that were playing support and also headlining the marquee in that period, all of whom are covered in volume 2. So we started that list between, I think the first one was March, maybe early April last year. That was Alan Reid, who was and still is the singer in Palace. He was my first. And then in October, I think it was, the last one I did was Mark Kelly, who was and still is the keyboard player in Marillion. So that's 6 months of interviews, 85 different people for the book. And we got absolutely everybody on a wish list apart from one.
Dare I ask who the one is?
So it's a large Scottish gentleman by the name of Fish.
Oh.
So he's the singer in Marillion,
he might
was. Ironically and frustratingly, my publisher, Nick Chilton, spoke to Fish on the phone for about an hour as Fish explained why he didn't want to be interviewed.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, he could have spoken to me for an hour instead, and I would have got everything I wanted from him. But he's quite a chatty guy, and he's published quite a lot of sleeve notes, and he's been interviewed many times. So we were able to draw on lots of comments from him. But, you know, he's just a small part of a big story. And we interviewed everybody else on Zoom, some by email, a couple by phone, and in one case, face to face. I went to see Chris McMahon, a group called Hayes, who are from Sheffield, which isn't too far from here. So it was a whole mix. And gradually we pieced together the story, you know, and as you said earlier, Chris, it's a big job of research. Well, it's a mountain of research. And then the challenge was to be able to thread that story into something that was compelling, was interesting to read. And in fact, as Andy Glass, who's the guitar player in Solstice, said to me last week, he felt like he was on the side of the bands that we talked about. He was excited to see what was happening next. And of course, he knows the story. And in the end, most of them fell by the wayside and failed commercially. But this one, because it's the upward trajectory, and that's why it's called A Mirror of Dreams, because they're expecting to do well and fulfill those dreams. And it's a lyric from a 12th Night song as well, which is a kind of a cunning way of linking back to the music. And of course, volume 2 is called Playground of Broken Hearts, which is a Marillion lyric. So that's kind of the downward side of the story to come next year.
So was it during the interview stage that you realised that you had enough material for 2 books? I guess, was it during those 6?
Yeah, it was.
That
no, absolutely
time?
was. I could tell you specifically when it was as well. I interviewed a guy called Francis Dunnery, who was in a group called It Bites in the 80s. I'm sure you remember Calling All the Heroes.
I remember that, yeah.
Frank's a character. I've known Frank for a few years. And we were chatting to him. He's resident on the East Coast of America now and has been for quite a long time. And we were saying, it was an interview with myself and Frank, and Greg Sporton was on the call. We were just chatting and saying, you know, this is starting to get really unwieldy, this project, because we agreed to do 100,000 words. We ended up writing 250,000 words. And we're just worried about how much we'll have to cut out to meet the brief of the book. And Frank says, well, just do 2. Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So in fact, that's what we did. So we had a very hard think about where we would split the story, and the end of 83 kind of gave us a good word balance. So the second volume should be around about the same size as the first in terms of page count and word count, which keeps the publisher happy. And it was also a good break in the story, and that it was kind of at the top of the rise, if you like, and then it parallels in 84, and then we think it slightly starts to tip away from 85 onwards. So yes, it wasn't. I wasn't commissioned to write 2 books, but during the research and the interview period, it seemed to be a very sensible way to do it. And in fact, we have so many brilliant images and scans that we wanted to include as many of those as we could as well. And that means because we've got 2 volumes, we can continue with the very, very high quality imagery that you'd have seen in here. And certainly there are many more brilliant images to be seen when we put the 2nd volume out next year.
I was just going to say over the images, especially like around the chapter with the Reading Festival. I mean, it's a great chapter. You can picture being there, and the smell was a bit like the chapter with the marquee. I think it's really
Yes.
descriptive and chronologically as well, like kind of from the Friday right through to the Sunday. So it was brilliant, and also pictures of the fronts of the fanzines,
Yes.
like the Forgotten fanzines and the
Yes.
fanzines that started in the mid-80s after the earlier attempts. That's a great chapter as well, I think, Andrew.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I thank at the front of the book lots of people who helped, but I give special thanks to a certain number of people who actually emptied their lofts out for me, packaged up their memorabilia, sent it to me in the post, which is I still get nervous about, right? And then I was able to sit here and scan all of those covers, and also use my my reader to scan all the text in as well. And that gave me some brilliant research material. And of course, I had to box them all up and send them all back again. And thankfully, nothing was lost in the post. But it was an important part of the community, if you like, was the fanzines were written by the fans that were in the room. And one in particular, which is Court Jester, was written by a young lad from North London, who subsequently went on to found Prog magazine. So Jerry Ewing was there at the time. He's the editor of Prog magazine. He's written the foreword for the book, and we'll do the foreword for the 2nd book as well. So it all kind of joined up. But yeah, great fun, great fun.
And of course, like you can picture, because you said like they were the mainstream media. There's a couple of, I want to say, scathing articles from magazines
scathing.
such as Sounds, and especially the one after the Reading Festival, I think it was. And you know, the mainstream media did not hold back of their opinion, did they?
No, they didn't. And we remember at the time you used to get your weekly newspaper on a Thursday. It was Sounds and Melody Maker and the NME. And sometimes you might go and get the bi-weekly magazine Kerrang, which occasionally covered this kind of music. And apart from a couple of journalists, Phil Bell was one I spoke to in particular, there was nothing but scathing contempt, because they had the same scathing contempt for the classic prog bands in the 70s, and they were having none of it in the 80s. And they were all these bands were kicking against continual downplaying of what they were trying to achieve, which is, it's a shame. But nevertheless, as I said, 5 of the 6 bands are still going, still performing, and still recording albums. So who was right?
Yeah, that's true. So, do you expect the 2nd volume to be the first half of next year, or is there a timescale for when we might see volume 2?
So released? Yeah, it will, I expect, be the first half of 2025. So it's written, it's finished. We've got a few polishings to do. I was in conversation last week with I won't name drop, but a very well-known musician within this genre. He requested a couple of corrections for volume 2. Great stuff. We can do that. I think it will be laid out early in 2025, and I expect publication in the first half of next year. That's kind of out of my hands, really. So, but that's the expectation, is that we'll have it out certainly by this time next year, I expect.
And I just want to say it is such for me, like you say, that's new to prog rock. I think it's a brilliant book to get into and learn all about the bands and the songs. You've got a playlist, I think, that's good that we can put a link to on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what would your pick be of a song that listeners and viewers should go out and hunt for first, perhaps, from this era?
Wow. Okay. Thing to remember about prog rock songs, they're all very long.
Very long.
They're often very noodly. Lots of instrumental sections in strange time signatures. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But if I was to pick one song from that whole from this whole era that's covered in here, it would be a song from the album Live and Let Live by 12th Night, and the song is called Sequences. It's relatively short in terms of long songs go. I think it's about 15 minutes. But it's a fascinating song that started life as an instrumental piece, and was developed over many years, and has a really genuinely fabulous lyric about a young man being sent off to the First World War and what happened to him while he was there. I mean, it's not exactly uplifting, but the musicianship, the arrangement, and the vocal by the late Jeff Mann on this live recording at the Marquee in November 1983 would be my starting point for this. In fact, it was my starting point for this genre when I saw that band back in 1984.
We will hunt that playlist down and hunt that down. Best of luck with Volume 1, Andrew, and I'll be looking out for Volume 2. Brilliantly written book. It's fantastic. Thank you for
so
joining
much, Chris.
us. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome, and talk to you again soon.
My thanks to Andrew Wilde there, and I tell you what, it is an absolutely brilliant book, A Mirror of Dreams. I'll just show you the back cover. But it is just so in depth, and as I said, I've been honest, my knowledge of prog rock is, it's quite minimal, but this is just an absolutely brilliant education into this early 80s period. It is so in depth. And since the interview, Andrew has added to YouTube a playlist of his pick of the songs from this period. So if you search a Mirror of Dreams playlist, Andrew Wilde, we'll put a link on the bottom. You can pick out some of the songs from some of the bands mentioned, which is a brilliant idea to accompany the book. I mean, for example, one of my favourite sections is to do with the Marquee Club. And this is the detail that you get. I'm just going to show you one page. But chronologically, a list of the gigs at that time, all in order. And for example, 12th Night, who they were supporting, IQ, and who else were on that night. It is just so in depth. It must have took absolutely ages to put that together. And it goes on, the Marquee section, right up to 1988. And one of my other favourite sections would be to do with the Reading Festival, which is so in depth from that Reading Festival of 1983. I'm just going to show you a little bit of that. But we get a full breakdown of the weekend with some brilliant pictures from people who were there. One of my other favourite sections is to do with the fanzines that were created, and it includes some brilliant examples of the artwork from the time. Court Jester was one of the most popular ones, and it's such a brilliant chapter that when prog rock wasn't getting the mainstream media attention it deserved, fans went out and wrote their own articles, and people were buying these fanzines at gigs. And as Andrew has mentioned, we are going to get another volume. We end in 1983. Volume 2 is going to be released next year. It is so extensive, but just a brilliant book for music fans all over. I've really enjoyed reading this. And you see the characters during the book. As I say, you don't have to know about Marillion, Pendragon, IQ. It is just a brilliantly written book about that time. And bring on volume 2. That's what I say. The chapter about the Marquee, you feel like you were there. Really descriptive. I wish I was there. It sounds like a great place for a gig. Another fascinating page, rejection letters that 12th Night had as part of their journey. It is full of fascinating documents, as well as quotes and interviews with so many people in the business. So that's it from me on the Benson interviews. We've got another interview with Andrew Wilde on this YouTube channel where he's done a book all about Live Aid. Make sure you check that out. We'll put a link in the corner as well. That's it from me. Bye for now.